Thank you, and it's lovely to be here, and yeah, I'm really happy to be able to be here. So I'll try and keep it short, but I've had kind of a squiggly career path. I've not really followed like a linear path, but I'm an anthropologist. I studied anthropology at the University of Sussex for my bachelor's, and then I came to Geneva to study anthropology in my master's and a PhD at the Graduate Institute of International Development Studies. I've always been very interested in global health, and my PhD topic focused on that as well. So I was working on in Colombia on a program that was looking at mosquito-borne diseases. When I finished my PhD, I knew that I didn't want to stay in academia. I think I wanted to work in more of an applied setting and not also have a bit more job security, because it can be quite precarious trying to find an academic job. And so I became a consultant at the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria in Geneva. And I worked there for a year in communications as a specialist for COVID-19 communication. So this was in the middle of the pandemic. And yeah, it was all about shaping the positioning and the narrative of the organization as they were dealing with this new pandemic. Then I got a job at the International Committee International Committee of the Red Cross as a research and methodology advisor. So I was going back into more of a research role, but again in more of an applied setting. So I was advising ICRC researchers on their methodology, on ethics questions, on data collection questions, and that was really interesting. I then moved into a different sector, into the environmental sector, as a specialist for monitoring and evaluation at the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And in this role, it was more about thinking about developing a structure and indicators for the organization to measure their performance of different programs around the world. So I was thinking, again, more in a kind of a research and methodology way about performance. But my real love is really writing, and my interest is really in global health as well. So I decided to come back to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria, but in a bit more of a broader role. So I'm now working as the lead for executive communications. So my day-to-day in this role is basically I manage a small team, and what we do is we're focusing on the positioning of the organization. We're focusing on the narrative around key health topics for the organization. We produce a number of different publications. We write the speeches for our leadership. We write opinion pieces that are then published in media. We also do different things like content gathering missions. So we'll go to the field and see how programs are performing. So for instance, I was in Paraguay a couple of weeks ago, looking at their tuberculosis programs with indigenous communities and with incarcerated populations. So it's really varied, and it's always changing. There's always a lot going on, and I really enjoy being able to kind of follow all the politics as well of global health. But I'll stop there because I don't want to take too much time. But yeah, that's basically my day-to-day. And feel free to reach out on LinkedIn if you want to reach out in person.
Super, Rosie. Thank you so much. That's really interesting. Imagine just coming back from Paraguay. How exciting. Srivani, can we turn to you now, please, to do a similar story for us? Thank you.
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be on this call today. I'm Srivani, originally from India, and I've had a bit of an unconventional career path. I've spent about 10 years in tech with the Tata Group in India, US, and the UK. Worked across digital consulting, product management, enterprise transformation, so on and so forth. All the jargons that we see in the paper today, nothing to do with policy, nothing to do with international organizations, completely from a private sector space. And then I happened to do my MBA from Cambridge, and I think that 1 year was transformative. While I was thinking, what do I want to do next, realized I needed to be in the confluence of society and tech, a domain that I was familiar with. And that's how I was talking to a couple of seniors. In fact, a professor from Cambridge put me in touch with our alumni from the international organizations, precisely like the call that we're having today. And over a couple of conversations, met this alumni from the forum who had a similar background like mine, and we got talking. And that's how I am today. I work as the strategy and engagement lead at the World Economic Forum. While I joined on the tech team to manage a community of chief digital officers and set it up in China, I can talk a little bit more about the work that the forum does and how the community is usually set up and the narratives around it. My current role is around engaging small and medium businesses with the World Economic Forum. So I work after the strategy and engagement of them, a bit of business development as well. So yeah, slightly unconventional from private sector to international organizations. And if anybody wants to get in touch later, happy to connect on LinkedIn. And I'll keep it short. Yes. Over to you.
That's super. Thank you so much. I'm interested that we have an MBA and a PhD already. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Very, yeah. Let's see what else transpires. Ahmed, may we turn to you now, please? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to speak at this event. I'm looking forward to the questions. So I guess unconventional, but maybe a more straightforward career journey for me. So I did economics at Cambridge at GCSEs, and then went on to do my PhD in economics at UCL. During my time there, I was approached to help set up the UK operations of Al-Ain Social Care Foundation, Al-Ain being Arabic for eye, which is a metaphor for caring and looking after, which is what we do. We look after orphaned children living with their families, with their extended families in Iraq, primarily currently supporting around 100,000 of those children in Iraq, providing them with comprehensive care support. So I was approached on a voluntary basis to help set up the UK operations of the charity, of the organization, which I did. And then one thing led to the other. I became more involved in the organization. Finishing my PhD, I, for a short period of time, worked at the National Audit Office as a researcher, but the demand on my time with the organization grew more and more, and the organization in the UK grew from having no employees to currently around 40 employees. So I oversaw that expansion and growth within the UK. But then I also did a master's in NGO management at what is currently Bayes Business School. And with those kind of ideas, I helped restructure the organization with the local chapters that we have around Europe, the UK, US, Australia, and Canada to kind of become more of an international NGO with a more structured presence around the world. But very importantly as well, helped expand the operations of the organization outside of Iraq to Afghanistan and Ghana and currently Yemen as well, with all the challenges that come with working in those kind of regions. On the day that we started supporting families in Afghanistan was the very same day that Taliban took over Kabul. So that came with obviously a lot of challenges in itself. So I'm currently the deputy CEO of the Al-Ain International organization that we set up. So my day-to-day really varies because I'm kind of a bit in every area of the work, from marketing to sponsorship to finance to technology. So it's just overseeing the various operations at the international level, but also overseeing the field operations, particularly in Afghanistan and Ghana at the moment. So yeah, that's me.
Wow, goodness me. Thank you very much indeed. What a epically big job that sounds. And Lucy, last but not least, but in fact, before you start speaking, may I just encourage our attendees to keep introducing themselves. It's really, really helpful for us to find out a little bit more about who you are so that we can make sure that we're trying to get the right information to you as well. I appreciate some people have had trouble accessing the chat, and I'm really sorry about that, but you're most welcome to Teams message me separately if that's the case. Lucy, may you introduce yourself and what you do day to day, please?
Hi, yes. Are you still able to hear me okay? Had dodgy issues today with my internet. So yeah, my name's Lucy. I'm the director of the Human Settlements Group, which is a very old-fashioned way of talking about urban areas at the International Institute for Environment and Development. And right now I do quite an academic job, which wasn't what I planned at the start of my career. And I do want to say that my career started really quite a long time ago. I think it's important to make that point, because actually the world of development really shifts quite a lot. So I did modern languages at Cambridge and graduated in 1999. And during that time, I had a very formative experience in my year abroad in Chile, when I realised that the sort of linguistic or the literary tradition in Cambridge wasn't really teaching me much about the sort of society, economy and politics of these countries that I was interested in. So I thought, okay, I need to do some more studying, and I did a master's in Latin American studies straight away afterwards, and then thought, I've got French and Spanish, but if I want to specialize in Latin America, I need to learn Portuguese. So I took myself off to Brazil to do an internship in Rio in ActionAid, and the fear of being alone in Rio without Portuguese was huge enough to mean that I really did learn it. And then I also did another internship after that in Geneva at a very small research institute in the UN on social development issues. And I'd been lured to Geneva to work on Latin American social movements. But when I arrived, the researcher that I came to work with said, no, you're going to help me with a new project on Central Asia, the former Soviet states of Central Asia. And I actually had to look them up in Atlas, and found myself working on Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. And that was a bit off-putting, but it actually led to my first job, real job with real pay, where I applied for a job at a small research institute in Oxford, and that had a program in Central Asia, and they weren't actually looking for a research assistant to work on Central Asia. But when they saw my CV, which was a little bit unusual, they said, come and work on Central Asia. And then I found myself going to the Stans repeatedly over many years, until my boss said, you need a PhD. So like other people on this call, I went off to do a PhD, which their organisation helped to sponsor. And I went back to Brazil. There was also, although I did it, I guess, for the love of studying and changing disciplines to become a social scientist, a political sociologist, I realised that if I was going to sort of get a career in international development, which by then I thought, this is what I want, I need more experience in the field. Well, that's what I felt, the field. I wasn't in a field, I was in Sao Paulo, but there was this sense that I needed to get more experience outside of Northern Europe, put it that way. But by the time I got my PhD, Latin America was no longer a priority of many NGOs, certainly not of the UK government, which is where I ultimately wanted to work. So I thought, okay, I'll go and do a postdoc. You thought you could stop at a PhD, but you can keep going. So I went to Cape Town to do a postdoc, and I was traveling to Mozambique using my Portuguese and doing research on housing and citizenship in Maputo, and that worked. And during that postdoc year, I got into the now defunct Department for International Development, which was an amazing experience. And I spent 7 years there, half of it in the UK in London and half of it in New York, where I got myself seconded into the International Rescue Committee, which is David Miliband's outfit, for those of you that remember him, and part-time in the UK mission to the UN, so into the Foreign Office. But then, as I mentioned, development changes and becomes politicized, and I felt that I couldn't, in good conscience, work for someone like Priti Patel, so I left, and luckily into the arms of IIED, who I've been working with, the Research Institute, and back to doing research. And now I run quite large research programs working with refugees in East Africa and the Middle East, and that's why I just came back from Amman. And yeah, I've sort of devoted the last 5 years to thinking about how we could have a world without refugee camps, and we could better accommodate refugees and other displaced people in towns and cities. So that's me.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And really fascinating to hear that other squiggly career. I think Rosie used that expression, didn't you, as well? Lucy, thank you very much indeed. OK, well, thank you so much to the four of you. What wonderful kind of sample of different ways into thinking about international organisations and international development we've got on our call this evening. And I'm sorry that our fifth panellist hasn't been able to show, and we're not quite sure why, but we have wonderful speakers here. So I'm going to kick off with some questions. Ones that thank you to those of you who submitted them beforehand, and I've got some others up my sleeve as well. But as well. But now's your chance. People on our call, we've got a huge number of students and researchers on the call this evening. So please, now is your moment to be popping questions into the chat. But my first question to you all is, I don't know who wants to take this one first, but do you think you need a PhD to work in international development? Because you all do have PhDs at the moment, or an MBA. So what is it about a further degree that helps? And does everybody on this call really now need to go and get themselves a PhD? Please say no. Rosie, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. No, I don't think you do. Is the short answer.
Thank goodness.
I think it's definitely, I mean, I stayed on to do a PhD because I really, really enjoyed anthropology, and I wanted to do longer fieldwork. And I think it's definitely helped me in the sense of doing that longer field work and really, going much more into depth in the topic and becoming, more skilled at interviewing and more knowledgeable in a specific area. But I definitely think you don't need a PhD to work in international organizations or development. I think it depends unless it's something specific. I think like Lucy, in your case, it was asked for in your case. But yeah.
That's positive. Thank you very much indeed. Do any of the rest of you, do you want to add something to that? Srivani, with an MBA, was that an important way of transitioning from the world of tech into international development? I know there was that networking thing that happened during your MBA, but what are your thoughts?
I have two things to cover. One is that if someone does not come from an international background, international organizational relationships background, and would like to transition, I would definitely recommend a master's program or an alumni network or a network as such. That helps you open the doors, which otherwise wouldn't be so easy to open. That's number one. Two, but if let's say you are from the background and you don't want to do a PhD, which is completely fine, but definitely substantiate that with solid experience before so that your profile has an edge over the other profiles that are being considered for that role. So make sure that there is some level of experience or the target that you're trying to make matches with your previous profile and where you would want to go. But yes, not necessarily an MBA or a PhD.
Okay, great. I hope that that's reassuring to the people on the call right now. Although I guess the flip side, and we might come back to this, is how do kind of more mature career entrants kind of make that switch across as well. But Lucy, is that something you want to contribute to now?
Yeah, I was just going to agree that you don't need a PhD, but you probably do need a master's, I would say. Although with IIED, we're sort of changing our recruitment to be more inclusive, and so I say you have to have a master's, but you do learn an awful lot doing a master's. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And on the PhD side, I would say that I couldn't really do my job without a PhD because, as I said, I'm doing a very academic job. I get funding from UK research councils, and I think I'd be unlikely to have been able to do the fundraising I do without having a PhD, unless I don't know. But there are other people in my institute who don't have them. So you can do different sorts of research where you don't need to have the PhD to prove yourself. But definitely, I definitely think it would be tough without a master's, I think.
And that's partly because of literally the stuff you learn on the masters, but also the experiences that you might gain through the masters. Is that what you mean? Do you think?
Yeah, I guess you just need to. I mean, there are now some undergraduate degrees in international development. When I was at university, there weren't. I think, I think it would help. help to do one. And also actually, but as I think getting experience overseas is that you can do that through a PhD, and that is actually one of the main reasons I did one. It's also a way of getting yourself for extended periods of time working amongst communities, for example, and it's very rewarding as well as useful for a career path.
Yes, and we mustn't forget that side of things as well. Brilliant. Ahmed, may I turn to you? Obviously, we're now thinking about this idea of how do we get experience, and you started off working for your organisation as a volunteer, and then gradually it took over your life, and somehow they turned to paying you. So, what are your thoughts on the kinds of experiences that our attendees might be able to get? There's a question in the chat about being underqualified and being overqualified. So could you talk to us a little bit about the kind of experiences that people might be looking for, please?
Sure. So I think volunteering obviously is always a good way to get into the sector and get some exposure. I think different organizations will have different schemes in place to support that. I think, to be meaningful, really, you're looking for a few months internships or volunteering where you can really get into the organization and understand the work a bit more. And I think many organizations also find that more useful than kind of ad hoc volunteerism here and there. So I think trying to seek opportunities with international organizations where if you have the time to commit to a few months of really supporting and helping is a good way to get some exposure into the sector and try and see whether it's right for you to begin with and gradually take on more and more responsibilities. But it all depends, again, at the level in which you're entering. I think with coming straight out of an undergraduate degree, I think that becomes more easy. I think at a more senior level, I think the question of overqualified probably will come in place. But then there are other roles to explore, in terms of trustee positions or, more kind of strategic consultancy positions to support organizations. So again, maybe I don't have much experience across the board outside of my organization, but I think those are the kinds of things to consider. I think just being more engaged in volunteering, but on a longer term basis to be meaningful and understand the sector better. And if it's a more senior level, exploring trusteeship positions as well might give that exposure.
I think that's a really good idea, that getting exposure at a kind of governance level. I think that's really interesting, particularly for the more career changer people amongst our attendee body. Srivani, can I ask you, sort of following on from that, is there something about moving from private into third sector? I guess we're talking about third sector here, really, aren't we? I'm sure there's differences in the kind of environments that you find yourself in, but what about the kind of roles that people coming from private sector might find it in these third sector organizations?
Absolutely. I think that was a question I was trying to also relate to the previous question that you had asked, and glad. Thanks, Kate. So there are always similarities, there are always dissimilarities in terms of when you make a transition. There are always areas where you'd be comfortable in, areas that you'd be comfortable in, and areas that you would not. But the primary similarities, be it a private sector or any organization, comes under two different buckets. One is relationship management. So you will have to manage stakeholders, and probably I'm talking a bit at a mid-career level roles that you were talking about, slightly mature. But the relationship management internally as well as externally, stakeholder management becomes extremely important just in terms of how you would like to maintain relationships. Because in private sector, you have customers. Here we have partners, both from a government, public sector perspective, private sector perspective. We have NGOs, we have startups. But the core skills to maintain relationships, empathy, communication, strategized thinking, and following up with them, all of those remain the same. So if you're comfortable doing that, if you're a people person, if you're an extrovert, you are sure to find opportunities in both the places. And how do you deliver value that makes them stick with you? That's important. You grow the community, you also help them engage and stick with you for a longer time. So if that's a skill that you're interested in, there's a similarity always to get there. B is always the domain expertise. So let's say that private sector has a company around tech. There are a lot of international organizations working in tech literacy, in digital transformation, in AI today. So you always want to look at what has been your domain experiences in both the fronts and try and bring that similarity here. 3 is something that no organization can not have, is the organizing / project management / delivery skills. So if you're a good project manager, if you're good at organizing, if you're good at communication, as Rosie did mention about communication positioning, any of these skills are extremely crucial for both the organizations, and you can definitely see add a career in both the places. But one thing I'd like to underline is if you're making the transition, make sure you have a story that talks about the impact that you have delivered before and what can you bring to the table, because that becomes the value with which they evaluate you or your profile in terms of what can you do here. So always think of the efforts, but also think of the impact that you have delivered in both the places and try and create those parallel threads. But just to reiterate, A is relationships, B is the domain expertise you have. It could be climate, it could be tech, it could be policy for that matter. And then C, definitely organization, communication, project management skills. I hope that that's helpful.
That sounds really helpful, and I think the idea of our attendees looking for good ways to learn project management skills, you know, they're quite basic skills these days, aren't they, for all sorts of roles, getting to grips with that kind of those ways of working, those processes. Thank you, that was thoughtful and helpful. Thanks very much. So we've got a question from one of our attendees. Tom, thank you very much indeed. So Lucy, Tom's about to enter an MA program in Latin American studies. Do you think that's sufficient to go straight into a development role, or is further development specific study necessary?
I guess it depends what's in your Latin American Studies course. So I did Latin American Studies, but I chose my major topic was on society and development in Latin America, and I chose also other topics related to international politics and environment. So I sort of chose, it was a Latin American themed area studies masters, but I chose development sort of modules to do that, and I did a thesis on housing in Cuba. But if you're going to do a thesis on Latin American poetry, then that's not going to get you so far. I guess though that I would be interested to hear what other people think actually, but I think you're going to have to do something other than study to get yourself a job in development. It is very competitive. I mean, it certainly was when I was looking for a job in development, and that was a long time ago, and I assume it's only got worse since. So you'll have to do something to make yourself stand out, and that could be, if you're able to, volunteering or doing internships. But I appreciate that actually, you know, the people who are able to do unpaid internships, you know, certain types of people who can depend on family support and so on, that's hard. There are some graduate schemes around. My own institute is starting to think about how we open up graduate schemes, but even so, I assume there's going to be a very large number of applicants, and people will have to do something to stand out. And we recently advertised for a junior researcher position, and I think we got more than 1,000 applications. So yes, studying is great, but you'll probably have to do something else to show what value you can add beyond all the other people out there with their undergrad and master's degrees.
Wow, that's a sobering statistic. Thank you very much, Lucy. Tom, I hope that's given you some food for thought. So, Salma, I think that the question about do people transition into and from academic roles, we kind of answered that, I suppose, through our attendee, our panelists' career journeys. But just a very quick answer, perhaps, from any of you. Are you, now that you are in these more these kind of third sector spaces, are you likely to come back into academia, for example? Would you be mobile back that away? Would you come and be a lecturer, for example? Anybody like to take that? Ahmed, is that something that's on your radar as the next job for you?
It's always a possibility, but I think, you know, once you stay away from academia for a significant period of time, probably does become more difficult to go into that area. If it was a short break and then back, probably that works. But I think as a long time career, if you're in this field, to become fully back into the academic world, I think might have its challenges, but I'm happy to be proven wrong otherwise. If anybody else has any other experiences.
Rosie, you were vaguely nodding at that as well, I think.
Yeah, no, I think part of the challenge is if you stop publishing as well, because then you need to keep up with the debates and the conversations that are going on in academia. And I think you could have a career in development on the side, but then you'd need to keep somehow inserting yourself in those conversations to remain academically relevant, I'd say, for to come back into like a lecturer position, for instance.
I think research and mobility is a very interesting question. We could have an entire panel about that, but I think the answer is it's probably quite hard, Salma, if that was specifically your question. So a couple of people.
I can come in on that. No, it's just to say I agree with the point about publishing, and that I made a point of carrying on publishing when I went into the civil service. I published bits and pieces of my thesis and then published other articles related to the work that I was doing. But I don't think anyone would take me as a lecturer, right? Because I've never lectured. But there are other jobs in universities and academia, for example, like research institutes affiliated with universities, where some people like us could potentially move back into. There is, I also think there might be like there might be a pay differential going on that might not operate in our favour, I would say, as well, possibly.
I suspect that you're probably right. Yes, thank you. So there's a couple of questions in the chat which are quite long. I'm going to work through them in my mind, but just while I'm doing that, a question from somebody again through the chat to me personally, which you're welcome to do if that's easier. Rosie, I think you might be the closest that we have to a scientist on our panel. What about routes from scientists into international development? And I guess we could take, the skills of a scientist, never mind the specific kind of perhaps life science knowledge. Any thoughts on that while I look at these other questions? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at the Global Fund, for instance, there's a lot of different scientists, because there's a whole HIV department, a whole tuberculosis department, and another one for malaria, and then others on supply operations and this kind of thing, so that you can become really like a detailed expert in one of these fields and have a lot to contribute. So I think it's there's definitely a lot of entry points. I think if I remember the question, it's from someone who studied genomics. But I think there's definitely, from a subject matter, there's definitely entry points, and also from a skill set matter. And I think it's kind of going to what Srivani was saying. It's also about being able to translate the skills that you have into a way that's kind of understandable and relatable for the people who are looking to employ you. So yeah, I think that was part of the challenge of going from academia into a non-academic setting, is being able to kind of say, not just, oh, I've done a PhD, but I've got project management skills, I've got budget management skills, all these kind of different ways of translating what you've done.
Thank you very much. So there's a couple more questions about finding appropriate work experience, and if you're going to forgive me, I'm not shutting you down, I promise, but I want to allow space for other things. I think if come and have a chat, basically. I think we've had lots of good advice from our panel about finding good work experience. I'm going to be putting in the chat at the end and on my slides some resources for job sites around, but I think what we've heard is find experiences which might give you that edge, might make you look slightly different. So the route that Srivani has followed, for example, Lucy's gone an academic route into finding a way of doing research into international development. Ahmed's done it very much from the kind of ground upwards. So I think there are different ways into this field. So I hope that that's okay in our kind of focus on experiences for the time being. Thank you very much. So a question here, I like this question a lot, that making change from within versus without. And actually, interestingly, another question I've had in the chat, are there any limits to your power in terms of decision making? Is it better to actually try and work in kind of development finance? Is that where you're going to be able to make a change? So how can we effect change through development activities, I guess, is our big picture question. Who would like to take that first?
I don't mind jumping in, because that question about being a civil servant is kind of partly directed at me. I mean, being in DFID was kind of an amazing experience. So I joined just when there was a commitment to 0.7% of GNI being committed in law to the aid budget. And so at that time, DFID was recruiting people with ideas, recruiting a lot of people with around, I guess I had around 10 years experience at that time, and recruiting people from other sectors actually to come in and build programs of work. And DFID had an amazing reputation. I am speaking in the past tense because, well, firstly, it doesn't exist anymore, and also a lot has changed and it's lost a lot of its expertise. But at the time, people were like, wow, we want DFID in the room. And I got, you know, and I would go to places and people would listen to me. It was it's kind of an amazing experience. And while in DFID, I also worked to kind of push agendas that I thought were very important that were being ignored. So I worked to get more attention to the issue of gender-based violence against, school violence against women and girls by the Tory government rather than gender-based violence in emergencies, which was something that hadn't really been worked on. And so I kind of felt that I was sort of pushing as an advocate within the government as well. But then now working in research is really, you're very, very far away from making change, like bringing back change. Like if you can just get somebody to read one of your papers, let alone act on it, that's like, it's quite an achievement. So it does feel like you're working at a very different pace of change if you're in sort of research and sort of trying to do kind of policy advocacy work. It takes a really, really long time to sort of change things from the outside. But yeah, you can always jump. Ask about the moral dilemmas. Yeah, it became a very, afraid it became a very unpleasant place to work, DFID, and then then Boris Johnson got rid of it. So, and I think more and more people left because it became more and more difficult to operate. And the Foreign Office is a very, very different place to Department for International Development. And I know that, having been seconded into the mission in the US and in New York and seen how the Foreign Office operates. But that is also a track into the development world, and that is there is a graduate track there to take them. Either try your luck with the exams, which are fiendishly difficult, and I would never have been able to pass them, or you can go in a sort of slower kind of program management, project manager type route, and pray for a Labour government that will reinstate DFID.
Other parties are available, let's say that. Ahmed, where do you think the levers of power are in this international development?
I think the power obviously does lie outside of the international organizations a lot of the time, but I think there's still a huge role for advocacy within international organizations. There are different forums and platforms in which they do come together to influence policy changes, whether it's within the UK or whether it's an international level as well, through the United Nations various bodies, or through similar settings in other countries as well. But I would say that from within is probably more satisfying, because whilst the changes in policy might not come through, at least at the same time you are actually making that impact and difference directly on the causes that you're working in or supporting, and therefore from within, in a sense, you can play that dual role in trying to influence policy and have that advocacy, whilst not just giving up and expecting others to play that role.
Great, thank you. And how much do you think that the credibility of the work that your organisation does on the ground? You said those 100,000 children, I think it was in Iraq, am I right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, the credibility that you have of having that first-hand experience of working amongst those communities, where do you use that credibility?
Yeah, so within Iraq itself, for example, we play a huge role in trying to influence government to step up and take that responsibility for supporting the families that we are only supporting because not enough is being done at the governmental level, I guess. So that gives us a lot of leverage in conversations with governments, with politicians, etc., behind the scenes, to try and influence, with the knowledge that we are doing this huge amount of work anyway. So it's not just a hypothetical attempt or request to change policy, is based on the experiences that we have accumulated. So 100%, I think that work gives you the credibility to be able to influence and make changes. And a lot of NGOs will publish various research papers around the impact that obviously they're having, but more so about the impact that the lack of policy interventions is having on those beneficiaries, which makes a big difference as well.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Srivani, looking at it from the World Economic Forum point of view, how do you engage with these kind of NGOs and these international development organisations? How's that connection made?
I think Forum's slightly different in comparison to a regular international organization. It's slightly, so the mission and the core statement that our founder believes in is to improve the state of the world. And the way they choose to do it is by bringing different stakeholders to the same table. So forum essentially, and that's why impact is going to be something where we do not have a direct influence on, but what we could do is probably turn the needle in a way where such decisions are taken at the end of the day. So the idea of the organization, as well as the kind of work that I do in a day-to-day perspective, is we bring in the private sector, we bring in the governments, we bring in the NGOs, we bring in the startups, the mid-caps, all of them bring together and help solve a problem or accelerate best practices in terms of saying, hey, this community is doing it. If you don't do it, you're left out of this great conversation that's happening. So for example, there was this project happening in California on containing wildfires. So the forum brought in the tech companies, it brought in the climate companies, it brought in the local governments, and tried to help set up a framework that can help contain the fires. And this is just one example, and not trying to sell anything here, but just the way how the business model works on in terms of, we do not solution, but I think the idea is to have these conversations that impact the solution. For example, actually, I was just reading before this call on the global gender gap and the report that has come out. It takes about 131 years to kind of bridge the gap that we have today in terms of gender. Now, with such insights, what do organizations do, both from a public sector point of view, but also a private sector point of view? And how do we take these conversations forward is pretty much the thinking that happens here, and the core of it is driven by communities and community-driven thinking. So the idea is, how do you change these conversations at the end, also influence the actions, be it with any of the partners that we have today.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much for that insight into the work. Thank you. So if you work for a development agency from a certain country, does that position you to some extent as pro-US? Oh, interesting. Would it be difficult to transition out of this position to work for a government of another country? Who might like to take that question? Rosie, Lucy?
I mean, I don't have any personal experience in this, but just judging from like some of the colleagues in the Global Fund, I don't think it would stop you from working in an international organization or somewhere else, because I don't know, we like at the Global Fund, there's I think over 100 nationalities, and people come from all sorts of backgrounds. I have colleagues that have come from the Foreign Office in the UK, but others from other governments. So I think from my experience, I would say it wouldn't stop you. But I guess it depends as well where you want to work after. But I think maybe Lucy, you'll have more insight into this.
Yeah, so to work for the UK government, you, as a civil servant, you have to be either British or Commonwealth. I don't know. So hopping from one, but then other governments are not as restrictive as that. But I don't know in the case of the USAID, if you're going to be a civil servant, whether you have to be a national. I guess USAID also has a lot of contractors working for them, and there's often a route actually from doing that kind of work into other organizations. So particularly if you're out working in a country office, so you might, for example, find yourself at USAID as a contractor in Yemen or wherever, and while you're working there, you work alongside people from the WHO or UNICEF, and you might well then jump and be a consultant for them, or might potentially get a staff position. So I think there is, because you gave the example of USAID, which is a government agency. I don't know what the requirements are, nationality requirements are, but some government agencies will have them, including the UK government. But I don't think that you'll be sort of marked for life. I have friends who work for USAID, and they're very nice, and very, very liberal. And I think actually you're probably and people who stuck it during the Trump years as well, because they felt that somebody needed to be in charge who was, they needed people who knew what they were doing, and they couldn't just sort of jump ship. So I don't think people would sort of see somebody from USAID as sort of politicized in some way or have a certain agenda. No, I wouldn't think of it that way.
Great. Hopefully that's reassuring. Does anybody have any comments to make on the idea of working for development finance? Is that something that any of you Ahmed, I'm sure a lot of your role must be fundraising. Is there something that can you comment on? I've had a separate question about working in development finance. Does that give you are there more opportunities, do you think, working in that kind of field?
So I don't have much experience in that area, I think. But if the question is about transitioning from that into the international development organization kind of field of work, then I think definitely there's huge potential within there, because our work to a large extent depends on fundraising and generating those funds. And I think there's lots of relevant experience there that will benefit organizations for that transfer.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Right, I've got a couple more questions up my sleeve that I'm going to throw at the panel, but I'd say we're within 10 minutes or so the end of the call. So if there's something that you guys sitting out there, probably keen for your supper, would like to know, now is your chance to pop it into the chat. But whilst you're doing that, can I ask the panel, I pre-prepared you, so hopefully this isn't a surprise. Is AI affecting the work of international organisations and international development, do you think? Srivani, coming from tech, I'm going to throw that one to you to start off with, but then I'll see what the others have to say as well.
Yes, at a high level, yes. I think it's going to be a significant change in the upcoming years for sure, and it's going to be sooner than what we predicted it to be. I would give a timeline of about 1 to 2 to 3 years at max, and then we see a significant shift in how we go about doing our work. That's number one. Number two, but at a macro level, at a micro level, on how our jobs at a daily rate are getting impacted. We all know, we all use the assistants for our day-to-day things. They are significantly sometimes more efficient, but also we need to categorize what kind of work can be AI'd versus what kind of work can't be. And the need of the hour is to probably reskill ourselves in the domain where it can't be. It could be the real value that we as people bring in. So it's very important for us, and that's been the conversation I think that I've been trying to follow as well, is what is the work that can be protected, that needs significant intervention, significant value that you bring to the table, and what can't be. But it definitely makes us more efficient in terms of day-to-day operations. And then the answer to find that out depends upon the kind of work that we do, the role that we are in, the context that we come from. I can see that it's being used by the founder to the managing director to a person who has just joined the organization. So it has democratized the way all of us have worked for significantly, have made us significantly efficient. But I'd also think there are areas, especially within the international organization domain, because a lot of this is what humans bring to the table, be with the kind of the stakeholder management, the relationship management that we do with people, and that necessarily needs to have somebody there. The kind of impact work that we do, essentially from planning to strategizing to finally delivering it. A lot of it is still human, but I think we need to preserve and protect those parts, and also be efficient with the other parts. But I definitely see a change and heading in that direction.
That's super. Thank you. Rosie, thoughts from you, please, on AI? And if our panelists would like to be answering the questions in the chat whilst you're thinking about AI at the same time, that would be super.
In communications, I think AI has definitely got a role in terms of our work in translations in particular. We use AI a lot for translations. So a lot of funding requests come from many different countries around the world with a lot of documentation. So we use translations to AI in translations to really get through that volume of documents. And we have a whole translations team as well that then works after that on like tweaking things. But in the writing itself, it's interesting because we were wondering if we would be replaced by ChatGPT. But it's actually what we've noticed is it can't replace you at the moment, at least for things like political sensitivities and tone and things like that you need kind of the human background and knowledge to be able to take that into account. So yeah, at least from the comms perspective in translations, we're using it a lot, but other than that, not so much.
That's really interesting. At least humans are still going to be there for political sensitivity reasons. Ahmed, can you tell us about AI in your work, please?
So I think from our side, I think we're just starting to explore the impact and what difference it could make, and also making sure that we have our internal policies around the use of AI, even by employees, because now you receive pieces of work and you don't know like who produced this and how they produced it. Half of our job applications that come through now have cover letters that are written by AI. And luckily there are tools that can help tell you that as well, so we can understand. But I think it's just really changing the way that we look at how we receive information and how we distribute information as well. I think there's a lot that we can benefit from AI, but with risks that come with it. So I think for us, we're more now in our organization and just the reflection stage to try and really get to the bottom of what impact this will have and how we can adapt ourselves to its ever-changing and evolving nature as well.
Super, thank you. And Lucy and your guests might like also to be able to answer that question for us as well. Hello, what do you think about AI in your work?
So on a very mundane level, we started using it to take notes in meetings and also to analyze kind of internal staff surveys. But everyone's always very cautious, and they spend time going over the results as well to check that AI's kind of picked out the things that we think are important, and often it hasn't always. I think we're probably got our heads a bit in the sand about, as researchers, how our jobs could potentially not disappear altogether, but certain aspects of it we might not need to be hired to do. I think particularly if you're thinking about summarizing the literature on a particular topic. But I guess there's always this nervousness that AI doesn't pick out the things that a human would that are most important. And also, I was thinking about this today. I mean, can AI really, if you're reading through the literature and you're trying to think about where you've got your value added, where you can design a research proposal that's going to sort of, do something new. I'm not sure AI can really have that sort of creative spark and come up with what's not there, which is part of what research is all about. But I fully expect to be proven wrong on this, and I'm a bit of an ostrich because I'm sticking my head in the sand about it.
Join that club. Brilliant. All right. And Ahmed, thank you for making the point about cover letters. So to anybody on this call, if you are using ChatGPT for a cover letter, please put your own persona on it at some level. All right. Thank you. We've just got one final question there in the chat. So I'm going to ask for one key thing from each of you, please, that stand out when you look at a job application. So Lucy, you spoke last, so I'm going to ask you to go first now. Do you do recruitment? What stands out in a job application? One thing only.
That's a bit of a difficult question. I guess I'd probably look for significant time spent in a low or middle income country.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much. Ahmed, what about you?
I think something that demonstrates interest in the field of work that we're doing. So beyond just the typical work experience, etc. Just something that tells me that this person's values resonate with what we're doing.
Super. Thank you very much. Srivani, do you recruit for entry-level roles? What do you look for?
So essentially, I prefer to talk and know the person before I make a decision, because I do think that skills can be picked up on the job and we learn it as we go. A lot of it is also the attitude that the person comes along with in terms of learning something new, jumping into something new, not saying and taking that stand. So for me, a lot of it is A, attitude, B, energy that the candidate walks in, ready to learn, and positive energy, should be good to go. Skills you pick up, that's how we all started at some point.
Fantastic. Thank you. Super. And last but not least, Rosie, what do you look for in applications?
No, I would agree with Srivani. I think it's the feeling you get with someone when you're in an interview setting, and really the energy of the person and the interest they have for the role. I don't think you need to have all the skills to be able to do the job, because that you can learn, but definitely you need a good working relationship with the person.
That's super. Thank you so much. What a lovely positive way to end. What did I hear there? I heard about experience, I heard about values, I heard about energy and attitude. So I'm really hopeful that those things have given everybody on the call some real inspiration